Without further ado, let me just welcome the two panelists or co-speakers. So we've got Kate O'Sullivan from LinkedIn. Please come and join me in charge of public policy and thinking about economics in a broader sense. So we learn. Why don't you sit in the middle? And then Steve Coulter from the Green Alliance. Please join us. You'll hear in a moment. I think it's better for you to introduce yourselves, what you work on. I think you have some prepared remarks. But I wanted to just reflect quickly on the discussions we've had so far in the morning, which I thought was fascinating. We started off with an overview, thought-provoking and clear, as always, from Lord Turner, on the macro dimension. I thought it was quite his fundamental point that green jobs are significant, but in the macro context, not a transformative game changer if you're looking at the numbers of jobs involved. Because there have been transitions in this country. He mentioned the coal transition, where the number of people who've moved from one job to another, who've lost their jobs, was far, far greater. Still, we need to think very hard about how to help people transition out of jobs like oil and gas that will no longer be viable into new professions, and we need to remove the bottlenecks for making the green transition happen, and one of those bottlenecks is skills, and that's something that we want to, of course, focus on today in this panel. We then looked at some of the sectors, and I thought they were all fascinating because they're so incredibly different. The renewables discussion was very clear. There was a clear direction of travel, and this is obviously a train that has left the station a long time ago. It's moving, it's growing. There's some issues to sort out, but there's a clear sense of not only direction of travel, but also how to get there from a sort of green jobs and, I would say, skills perspective. The built environment one was fascinating because it was that sort of that multi-headed problem. There are so many dimensions in terms of, on the side of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the double glazing, the adaptation, making the infrastructure more resilient, and just the number of new jobs and also new business models coming out of that sector was just staggering. That one felt just much more early stage. And on the land use and the food transition, I thought it was a very, very interesting and fascinating call for more regenerative, more sustainable food. We all subscribe to that. But not yet, at least for me, not yet clarity on what does this actually mean for skills and for jobs. And coming back to what Adair Turner said as he called on us to also, I thought that was very interesting. He said that the adaptation side could actually be a very significant driver of new skills and new jobs, because we probably need a lot more people to manage our land in a much, much more sustainable way. So that was sort of my takeaway. What came out in all these sessions was a question that was unanswered by every panel, and this is what we're going to answer now, is, well, what does this mean for skills and how do we build those skills? One question that came through strongly is that there was a deep concern, for example, in the manufacturing sector, the car industry, which is today home to the best blue-collar jobs in Europe in particular. They're worried about transitioning into renewables or other industries where they may have less secure job prospects and lower pay and lower status. So that was something very clear, and that obviously links us back to the skills agenda. Kate, you work at LinkedIn. You tell us more about it, but you have your fingers on all this fascinating data. There's probably nobody else who sees better day to day what's happening in the job markets. Could you share your thoughts with us, please?
I'd be delighted to. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, great. First of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Guido, and thank you to the Conduit team for inviting us here today. I suppose, just by way of introduction, I'm Kate O'Sullivan. I work at LinkedIn. I work in the public policy team and the economic graph team. And I'm just going to say one or two words about the economic graph just to ground why we know what we know at LinkedIn. So effectively, the economic graph is what we would say the digital representation of the world's labour market. We've over 1 billion members globally. We've over 35 million members in the UK. And all of the signals that we see on the platform, whether it's members adding their skills, updating their profiles, whether it's recruiters using the platform to find job seekers, or indeed whether it's employers posting job ads. All of these data signals provide us with incredibly dynamic, unique and rich data with regards to what's happening in the labour market. And so I'm here today. I have a couple of prepared remarks which I hope will help ground the conversation and provide some insights into the data insights that we're seeing on LinkedIn. Given the topic of conversation today, as part of the Economic Graph team, the Economic Graph team is essentially the coming together of public policy professionals and data scientists within LinkedIn to identify where do we have unique data insights around specific labour market topics or themes. And one of those is actually green. And we started looking at green 2 years ago, where we developed a global green skills report. And every year since then, we've been updating it. And in actual fact, our 2024 edition has actually been launched today. So this is a perfectly timely conference for sharing some of the key takeaways from that report. The key takeaway is that we are seeing huge increases in green skill penetration, both demand for green skills and the number of employees that are gaining the skills. The data insights show that there has been significant shift in this space, even just in the past year. The demand for green skills in the UK is surging, with a remarkable 46% year-on-year increase in the share of job ads requiring green skills over the past 12 months. This has far outpaced the global increase that we have seen, which is about 12%. Over the past 3 years, the UK's compound annual growth rate in green job postings on our platform has reached just under 20%, ranking the UK third globally compared to a global rate of just 6%. Several critical trends are shaping this demand for green skills. First off, industries are increasingly focusing on sustainable supply chain management as businesses seek to align with environmental goals and new sustainability reporting regulations. This is driving the need for talent skilled in compliance, data reporting, and green logistics, for example. Second, the shift to renewable energy is transforming traditional sectors like utilities and construction, with a growing emphasis on clean energy solutions and sustainable building practices. Construction, and I know is a big topic of conversation, as you mentioned, Guido, earlier on today, will play a key role in achieving sustainability targets. Third, technology continues to be one of the fastest growing areas in the green economy, as innovation in green tech, clean tech, green finance and digital solutions become crucial to meeting environmental goals. Additionally, the growth of AI tools has transformed the tech sector. Tech is increasingly energy intensive, and that is one of the likely drivers of increased green skills demand across that sector. The new Labour government's clean energy mission, one of the core 5 missions in this government, also means that we can expect this trend to continue, with green skills taking on an ever-increasing importance across the economy. However, while these figures are encouraging, they also expose a critical challenge. The supply of green skills is struggling to keep pace with the surging demand. Despite the enthusiasm for green jobs, especially among those in carbon-intensive industries, there is a skills gap that threatens to undermine our progress towards the UK's ambitious climate targets for 2030 and 2050 alike. In our report today, we have this measure called the LinkedIn hiring rate, and that's a measure of the level of job seeker and hiring activity on the platform. In today's report, we have seen that the LinkedIn hiring rate for workers with green skills or titles is 72% higher than it is for the workforce overall. This indicates an intense demand for these workers. However, only 1 in 6 workers globally have the necessary green skills to satisfy the demand. Unless this can be addressed, there is a risk that climate ambitions are not met. This therefore needs to be a high priority for policymakers and will require specific policy initiatives, including at future COP summits, to incorporate workforce considerations, as without the necessary skills, net zero is not attainable. Moreover, this talent shortage is not just an economic issue, it's also a social one. The transition to a green economy must be inclusive and equitable to avoid deepening existing inequalities. For instance, industries like mining, oil, gas, and construction face particular challenges as workers may not realise their existing skills can transfer to renewable energy roles. Generational identity tied to traditional energy sectors must be acknowledged to avoid alienating these communities, which would also slow the pace for the energy transition. Focusing on a skills-first approach to hiring rather than climate targets alone is essential to support these workers and to adapt to new green roles and prevent resistance to broader climate action. To effectively bridge the skills gap, collaboration across sectors is essential. Connecting skills providers with businesses is a critical step to ensure the future training aligns with the evolving needs of the economy. The drastic acceleration we need in green talent development will not happen unless all sectors work in concert. We cannot wait or rely on the educational system alone to provide a new generation of climate fluent workers. Instead, we need a comprehensive approach where government, employers, training providers, and educational institutions each play a role in providing and building the climate workforce. The government's recent launch of the Skills England is a very encouraging step. By bringing together central and local authorities, businesses, training organisations, and unions, we can create a more responsive and dynamic skills ecosystem that better serves our green transition. But perhaps more importantly, it is hugely welcome that Skills England will serve as the central hub for jobs and growth data, providing critical data insights to inform training provision. By collecting and analysing data on local skills needs, it can precisely identify where the demand is highest and where resource is needed the most, building on the success of the local skills improvement plans. In addition to collaboration, geographically targeted policies will also be crucial, as will funding. The UK's economic landscape is diverse, with different regions possessing unique strengths and challenges. Whether it's chemical manufacturing in the northeast or supporting the technology sector in the south, tailored strategies will be essential to ensure that the benefits of the green transition are distributed equitably. Addressing the green skills gap means also tackling systemic barriers that have historically excluded certain workforce groups. Our data reveals a gender disparity in green skills acquisition. Women are less likely than men to possess these critical skills, and they remain underrepresented in leadership roles within green industries. This disparity limits the diversity of perspectives and innovation, hindering our ability to fully realise the potential of a green economy. We need to promote inclusive hiring and promotion practices within green industries and support initiatives that encourage women and underrepresented groups to pursue career in STEM fields. This can be facilitated through policy measures such as tax incentives, subsidies, or public recognition programs that reward companies demonstrating a strong commitment to diversity and inclusion. The green transition represents both a profound challenge and a remarkable opportunity. We stand at the threshold of reshaping our economy and society to be more sustainable, inclusive, and just. However, achieving this will require urgent and coordinated action to close the green skills gap, ensure equitable access to green jobs, and to build an ecosystem where everyone has the tools to succeed. To meet the UK's ambitious climate targets, it is crucial that the workforce investments are integrated into climate policies. Every pathway to net zero depends on having a skilled workforce to bring these plans to life. COP29 presents a unique opportunity to declare workers as key enablers of climate ambition and to ensure that green skills development takes centre stage in the climate agenda. Moreover, we need climate policy that is created in collaboration with workforce agencies, employers and educators, aligning skills development with industrial strategy and labour market needs. Skills England will go some way to doing this, and we on behalf of LinkedIn. We've partnered with the UK government for quite some time. We look forward to continuing to partnering with the UK government on Skills England and to sharing our data insights as it strives to achieve a just and sustainable green economy for all.
Fascinating, thank you. And the report that's being launched today, so are we at the launch here of this report right now, or?
Well, if you want, you can.
You're witnessing the launch of the 2024 Green Skills Report by LinkedIn. I'm sure we can find it online.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. We'll drill a little bit deeper, I think, into the issues and opportunities here in this country. Steve.
Thank you very much. So I'm Steve Coulter. I'm head of economy at the Green Alliance, which is an environmental think tank, works very closely with politicians. So thanks very much for coming here, everybody, and inviting me. Tony Blair used to joke that he could announce World War III had begun during a speech on skills, and nobody would notice because they'd all be asleep. So it's great to see so many people here because it's extraordinarily important. And as Kate has laid out, it's really important to have very good data here. And ever since 2014, when George Osborne abolished the UK Commission on Education and Skills, we've been flying blind. It was the only body that did labour market analysis and forecasting. So we've had to rely on LinkedIn, which has done a very good job. So it's good to hear that you're partnering with Skills England because we'll no longer be flying blind. So I'm going to sort of make some sort of general comments about the main sort of structural challenges to green skills in the UK economy. First, I know Adair Turner has already made this remark, but I totally agree. The net number of green jobs is quite trifling. It's about 120,000 jobs that will be created over the next 5 years in a labour market of about 35 million. So the green jobs bonanza is not really there. Jobs are not the story here. The story is skills, because people are going to have to re-skill. There will be a lot of movement within sectors, and there will be a lot of movement within jobs as people take on new tasks, which they will need to be trained for. And the other thing to say is, okay, so successful countries tend to have a skills system that fits their economy. The UK is often derided as having a terrible skills system, but actually the UK has a very successful skills system, but it's a skills system that fits our economy, which is an economy that's primarily service-based with some pockets of advanced manufacturing. That kind of economy needs lots of graduates, as well as some very, very top industry apprenticeship systems, which we have with companies like BA and Rolls-Royce, which are more competitive than Oxbridge. But the trouble is it rations opportunity, this system. So something like 1/3 of people leave school without a decent GCSE pass in English or maths, so they're effectively functionally illiterate. And we need to change that. That's a huge challenge for our economy. Then we have the other challenges that are taking place. One of which we're here to talk about, which is the green transition, which is obviously very important. This is about retraining. It's about moving people from old economy jobs that are declining to new economy jobs in the low carbon sector, while also developing some completely new industries in things like hydrogen and CCS. But there's another transition that's probably actually more important, which is the digital transition, the technological transition. This is about humans, AI, and technology increasingly substituting for human beings in the labor market, and these human beings have to develop new skills and new things to do. The two we have a room full of greenies here. We could easily have a room full of tech bros and tech sisters, mostly tech bros, unfortunately, and they would be talking about completely different things. And it's something the government needs to grapple with, how these two transitions are working together and what we do about them. Fortunately, I think they're actually complementary, these two transitions. Both require lots of technicians with very good STEM skills. People will need to understand the software and the machines. For the technology transition, for the green transition, in many ways, the green transition is about technology, so you need people to understand these new systems of decarbonization. So both transitions require lots more STEM workers. But they also require STEM workers with different kinds of skills that go beyond STEM, so soft people skills, organizational skills, problem-solving skills. If you think of something like home decarbonization, might have just been once putting in a new low emissions boiler. Now it's about putting in a heat pump, maybe some solar panels, maybe putting in new insulation, maybe linking it all up to the grid so you can sell power when you're making too much of it. Making all this controlled by AI, so it's operating at its most effective. This is a very, very complex set of skills that goes way beyond just the technology. So you will need people who can do the STEM stuff, but also can do the organizational and problem-solving task as well. And then finally, the green transition is an incredibly complex undertaking. If you think about what's going on, we're moving from an economy that was built ever since its foundation on fossil fuels to one based on something else. That means pretty much everything has to change. So it's a phenomenally complex organizational task. And again, that's why you need graduates. You need a lot of professionals. You need things like compliance managers, systems architects, lawyers, and consultants to manage this very complex task. So I'm optimistic that both the green and the technological transitions complement each other rather than undermine each other. There is a further complication, though, which isn't always discussed in relation to skills policy. If you think about the labor market, it's both a stock and a flow. You obviously need to think about the route into the labor market from school and university. Young people are quite malleable, so it's easier to steer them towards green skills. They will also be longer in the labor market, so you're making more efficient use of resources. But the flow problem is actually more difficult and more intractable, because most people who are going to be affected by the green transition are already in the labor market. So that's where the retraining issue comes in. People are often reluctant to retrain. They may have trained for something specific. Their skills and their attributes and their knowledge and their emotions may be tied up in what they do. They don't take kindly to being told, well, no, we can't do that anymore. You've got to do something different, even if it's relatively adjacent. So addressing the stock and the flow is very important. So 3 things we need to do. Firstly, stop bashing higher education. The last government loved to bash higher education, which is a shame. It's one of the few things this country does really well, and it's very important for the green transition. As I mentioned, we'll probably need lots more graduates to manage the complex transitions. Even for sort of STEM issues, STEM skills, these will still need to be complemented by the soft managerial cooperation and problem-solving skills that are going to be needed. Higher education, by which I don't just mean universities, I mean also 3-year degrees, but also 1-year HNDs and diplomas. It's generally what's meant by higher education. Higher education is a very good place to acquire a combination of both these hard and soft skills, because you're learning all this stuff, but you're also surrounded by other people, and you have to collaborate with them, and you work on them with projects, and you learn to get on with people from different backgrounds, and you learn to think for yourself, and you also learn how to learn, which is going to be very, very important as we reskill. There are problems with the higher education sector. I think it does need reform. I think we need to move well away from the current Russell Group Oxbridge model, where you just do very narrow academic stuff for 3 years, far away from home, spend most of it getting drunk. I think we need to move away from that model towards the sort of, I call it the Coventry University, South Bank University model, where universities collaborate with FE colleges in their vicinity. They co-create degrees with local employers. They're very linked in with local skills strategies. They offer modular degrees. You can do a bit of study alongside a bit of work. They offer 1 and 2 year professional programs that are not specifically academic. So the university system is very important, but it needs reform. Second, sort out apprenticeships. People have been saying this for actually literally hundreds of years. I came across a quote the other day: we must improve our industry apprenticeship system, otherwise the Germans will leave us far behind. This is from the 19th century, so we obviously haven't made very much progress on that. I'm encouraged by what the government's been saying on apprenticeships, but I'd like to see a few more things. I don't think, one thing they've done, which I think is a mistake, is loosening the restrictions on apprenticeships, so employers can now spend their apprenticeship levy money on more or less anything they like. This will only serve to reduce the number of people, especially young and underskilled people from deprived backgrounds, doing level 1s and 2, quite entry-level apprenticeships. Allowing employers to spend money on whatever they want could end up with executives spending their apprenticeship levy money on MBAs, which is probably not what we want for social mobility or facilitating the green transition. I think we need much more progress on green apprenticeships. We're short of 10,000 heat pump engineers, and I think the first heat pump apprenticeship course was only accredited last year or something, so we're very, very behind on that. Finally, deal with I mentioned the stock of people, the large number of people already in the labour market. Well, 9 million of these people lack basic skills. They can't read or write, and they lack digital skills. Digital skills defined as being able to send an email. How are you going to be able to participate in the green or technological transition when you can't send an email? And at the same time, there are huge skills shortages in agrotechnology, in farming, in construction, in decarbonisation, in manufacturing. So we need to find a way of dealing with this large number of people who have effectively been excluded from our labour market. Very difficult to reach. You may need specially tailored training and work experience routes into the labour market for these people, which is where technology may help. AI may play a role in this. But it's very, very important that we make sure that no one is excluded from the green transition. I think, as Kate was saying, I think only 9% of graduate engineers are women or something. I mean, that's absolutely insane. It's no wonder you're seeing these strangely skewed results. Huge problem with minority recruitment. Minorities don't seem to be very attracted by green skills. So yes, big problems. I'm encouraged by what we've seen by the government so far, but the jury's still out.
Fascinating, thank you. Kate, you've underscored a growing mismatch between supply and demand for green skills, and you've also shown that this is by far the largest growing category. But we all three of us seem to agree that in the grander scheme of things, if you're looking at absolute number of jobs, the green skills or the green jobs tradition is not going to fundamentally change the makeup of the UK labour force. So in a context where this country has traditionally, or has over the last decade, had low productivity, it's by the OECD, it's classed as low productivity, low skills, and low mobility. My question is the green skills thing just another thing to think about, or could it be the engine for driving productivity growth more broadly? And what is it you'd like this government to do? Who would like to take this question?
Oh, sure. I thought that was to Kate, so I zoned out for a second. But
I'm happy to kick off, no problem. Okay, very good. So I was saying earlier on that as an economic graph team in LinkedIn, we get a lot of knocks on our doors in relation to the data that we have and what are we seeing and how is the labour market reacting and what are the fastest growing jobs, employers, and so on and so forth. And we focused on green primarily because there wasn't what we believed anyway, there wasn't a huge amount of data out there, and we felt that we probably had some unique data to share with policymakers. But in the work that we've done heretofore, and I think this kind of goes in a roundabout way to your point, Guido, when we talk about green and we talk about climate change, a lot of the climate goals are really big, audacious goals, and they can seem almost insurmountable. And a lot of the work that we've done, we've a skills taxonomy of about 41,000 skills on LinkedIn. So we're fortunate enough in the sense that the platform is global, and so therefore we're able to track trends across countries on a global level, on a regional level, on a national level. And I suppose my first remark in response to your question is, this is a question we get the whole time from all countries. All countries feel they're not doing good enough, and they feel that they could be doing better, and that's not unique to the UK. But we tackled green in a sense whereby we took our skills taxonomy and we said, look, if you're going to be starting to look at heat pump providers or indeed people who are fully certified in green from the get-go, our data is not necessarily going to be very helpful to policymakers, employers, and so on and so forth in terms of trying to understand how they're going to tackle this. So the approach we took was we looked at the job families that were out there and we divided them into categories. whereby we looked at jobs that required absolutely green skills, we looked at jobs that might require green skills, and we looked at jobs that could potentially want green skills in the future, and then there's jobs that absolutely would never need green skills. And by, I suppose, breaking it down like that, we were able to identify that the rise on green skills globally and also in the UK is massive, but there's a gap emerging. I mentioned that 46% earlier on of the increase from one year to the next, this year to last year for the UK, in the rise in green jobs in the UK, but the supply side of that was actually 5.3%. So while we have job ads surging past, we don't have people who are reskilling and upskilling at the same pace. And that's not going to change unless we take certain steps. And some of the steps that we feel quite strongly about is that you don't need a fully, I'm not saying for one moment, to be absolutely clear, that there's not going to be need for degrees or certain qualifications for certain roles. But I think we all have a role to play, whether it's as individuals, job seekers, employers, workers, or indeed the government or anybody else involved in this space, to be almost breaking down the job families to understand and to track the reality that we're all doing our jobs a little bit differently at the moment, and we're all slowly but surely transitioning into a more green space. And I think when you look at it like that, you can probably map out various different stage posts whereby, as a government, going back to your question, how can we tackle meeting that gap between supply and demand, between our workforce and the growing need to have workers with these qualifications to increase productivity and growth for the UK?
I have an answer now. I think the question. I'll engage my brain slightly more. Yeah, so I think your question was about how can we be sure that the green jobs are higher productivity jobs? Yes, I mean, that's a massively critical issue because, as you say, we suffer from extremely low productivity. Our productivity level has basically not budged since the 2010s. It means effectively people have not had when you take account of inflation, no one's really had a pay rise since around then because we're not really productive enough. So ensuring that we sort out our productivity issue is almost as important as dealing with these transitions. And because of the things I said, because I think because of sort of the coincidence of the technology and the green transition and the importance of graduates, I'm relatively confident that we have a chance of making sure that these new types of jobs that emerge are relatively high productivity. Firstly, because I think there will be more graduate level jobs, even for the sort of technical type jobs, and graduate jobs tend to be better paid than non-graduate jobs, and it's not just to do with graduate status, it's because they bring a higher level of skills and they're better at team working and they're more productive than non-graduates. The fact that technological development will also make a lot of very unproductive jobs redundant because they will increasingly be done by machines is also good because that means you have at least the opportunity to move people into better paid, more demanding, and let's face it, hopefully more interesting jobs as well. Everyone complains about our machines are taking our jobs, but at the moment they're mostly taking the boring jobs. So as long as we can make some other jobs that are hopefully more interesting for people to move into, then that's not necessarily a problem. So I'm fairly optimistic that the confluence of the green and technological transitions will create a lot more opportunity at the sort of upper threshold of the labour market, and will create more better paid, more productive and more fulfilling jobs.
And will the market see to this? Or is there, because you've both emphasized the importance of Skills England in your introductory remarks. I'd just love to get your views on, what can a market do on its own on the skills side? And where does government need to step in? And one thing that worked really, really well on the panels this morning is the audience loved specific examples. So if there are any examples that come to mind from other countries or so that in your mind are doing this particularly well, would love to hear those just to make it practical. And there's also obviously lots of diversity in England. A lot of great innovation happens locally. So, I mean, kind of answering that, my own question is, you've both said at the statement that there is a big role for government. I'd just love to understand that better. And what has worked and what has perhaps not worked so well in the past?
Markets are great, especially compared with the alternatives. But markets will tend to sort of settle into an equilibrium. We have an equilibrium at the moment, as I said at the start of my talk, where top 2/3 of the labour market does pretty well, but it excludes the bottom 1/3. That's a stable equilibrium. We've been there for a long time, and it sort of works, but it's terrible for that 1/3 of people. So the market will not solve it by itself. It's actually very difficult for the government to solve it, because the government's been trying to solve this problem for a long time. So the market can sort of, trundle on a sort of, rather unsatisfactory path for a long time until something is done. Now we have these transitions. I mean, the market will solve the technological transition, I think, because it's companies leading the replacement of workers with AI and technology. It won't solve the green transition. The green transition is something that governments need to push them to do through policy, regulation, carrots and sticks, also massive subsidies. So, I mean, you want a successful country example. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the US, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, yes, it's incredibly messy. A lot of money has been wasted. A lot of it's probably been stolen. But it's also been very effective. So, the move of the US into low carbon technology and the development of low carbon technology in the US has proceeded apace. So I think if you have a really determined government that's prepared to use all the industrial policy levers at its disposal, it can make a difference. The big question is whether the UK has the resources to do its own IRA. I mean, the European Union does. We're not part of Europe anymore. There's a certain amount you can do with regulation and intervention into the labour market, which the government wants to do with Skills England. But it's a big task, and it takes a lot of money, and a lot of that money will be wasted, and you will face a lot of political opposition for doing that. Labour says it will do it. We have the National Wealth Fund, we have Great British Energy, which are relatively small compared with what they're doing in the US. They're at least thinking along the right lines. The government has to make this big push, but it's too early to tell whether they will succeed.
I would agree with all of that. I suppose going back to Skills England, as a data company, I think data is incredibly important, not just from LinkedIn, obviously, but the government itself has a huge amount of data resources at its disposal. And I think when you have data, you can measure things. And when you can measure things, you can action things. And so I think ensuring that under the umbrella of Skills England, I think taking a general approach in terms of bringing in all the actors, as I said in my opening remarks, and kind of learning from them and learning from the past maybe a little bit. We were involved in the Local Skills Initiative, and certainly what was apparent to me, having been involved in that programme, was, as I said again in my opening remarks, how diverse the UK is. And you have different concentrations of different types of industries. And some industries will benefit from the green and digital transition, and some may not. But I think anything that helps the government to identify very targeted practices or potentially policy initiatives at as local a level as you can go, at a regional level, I think will be very important. And also too, just in terms of helping the urban-rural divide and all that goes with it from a policy point of view. I know that you're asking for some examples. I mean, we've come across some examples in Germany or France where, there's a lot of collaboration, as you were saying, Steve, between educational institutions and employers, or indeed the government getting involved in terms of a twin track approach to ensure that students were getting on-site training. That could definitely be something that possibly could be looked at here. In Denmark, they have undertaken huge strides in terms of wind energy as a result of some interesting practices that they've taken there in terms of how they bring apprenticeships on board and get them up to speed in terms of new skills that they need to have for this. More generally, I suppose, at a global level, and something that we would believe in terms of COP29 is around the corner, and for the first time this year, I don't know to what extent folks in the room have been following COP, but for the first time this year, there is a day that's been devoted to human capital and the importance of human capital in achieving climate targets. And I think it would be great, this is obviously not just a UK play, but I think if governments are very serious about meeting their climate goals, they are going to have to address, to your point, Steve, the vast majority of workers out there are currently in jobs. And you're going to have to figure out ways to upskill and reskill your existing labour market and workforces. And I think any initiatives they can take in terms of declarations or otherwise coming out of COP29 into COP30 would be a very important signal, not just by the government, but to various different actors who are involved in this space. So I suppose they'd be top of mind for me in terms of some of the things that we'd be looking or suggesting to policymakers that they could consider in their armoury.
I'm wondering if we can take some questions from the audience. Is that possible? Yes. So maybe we'll take 2 questions, and if you want to address them to one of the panelists or any one of the 3 people on the panel, please, the gentleman here in the middle.
Hello. Oh, there you go. Yeah, hey, Alex Hughes, chair of the Green Jobs Foundation, also founder of an organisation called Inspired to Ignite that works with that third. So the 900,000 that are not in education, employment or training in the UK at the moment. My question is around the collaboration with businesses and education. So I live in a place that is a cold spot for further education, so there isn't the facilities, the infrastructure to do that. And being part of the local skills improvement plan process recently, I know for a fact that the engagement from businesses was extremely low. So I worry a little bit about I'm with you on the let's make it work with Skills England, but I also worry a little bit about the lack of collaboration happening. And I think there's a mindset shift that might need to be not forced, but encouraged by businesses to, I think we can be, we fall victim to seeing education and skills as a service to us. And I think that's something culturally that probably needs to change. And I'd love to know from your perspective, maybe from LinkedIn's perspective in particular, what role you could play in making that collaboration happen rather than under-resourced economic development teams or the BROs, the business representative organisations that, like chambers, that actually only represent about 3 or 4% of our employment.
Should we take that question? Yeah. So I'll just speak very briefly in terms of what our collaboration involved under the LSIPS programme. Ultimately, as a data company and as a company that would have a keen eye to movement in the labour market, let's just say generally speaking, the work that we actually undertook was quite unique globally. Typically, a lot of the data that we work on is at a national level. But in support of the need to look at a more regional level in the UK, we undertook bespoke regional work that kind of mapped back to the 38 LSIPs. And where we would have unique data insights is really trying to figure out the mismatch between jobs being advertised and the skill sets of folks that are based in that particular area. And so we would have shared that data with the LSIPs, and obviously, ultimately, it's for them to decide and for the chambers to decide what programs they might want to build on the back of that. But as far as we were concerned, hopefully the data was useful and helpful. We were certainly told it was. I take your point in terms of the collaboration, and I think it's almost like a chicken and egg, isn't it, in terms of I suppose trying to bring businesses to the table to understand the long-term benefits for all by getting involved and by collaborating on these types of initiatives. Ultimately, I suppose where you have tight labour markets is probably where you're going to see the likes of the HR equivalent departments for various different industries getting involved and being involved. And I suppose maybe that would be a trigger for businesses to get involved. Ultimately, I don't have a huge amount of insight at a massive regional level on other initiatives that might help. But I think we have a tight labour market. I think if you have a commitment, and I think if you have direction also too given by government and otherwise, that this is a key policy for the government, I think hopefully businesses will come behind, but maybe you'd have other thoughts based on your experience with businesses here on this particular topic. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, so I sat on a working group to help the previous government's Green Skills Delivery Task Force, which was a sort of employer-led thing run by DESNES to try and get more collaboration and more information sharing on the sort of green skills needs of the future. And it didn't really have very much money, didn't have much power, but it was actually a genuine attempt to sort of get business views on what kind of skills they needed straight into the heart of government. You know, you can criticize the previous government for quite a lot, but they took this quite seriously. They realized there was an impending crunch to do with green skills. We recommended to new incoming ministers that they continue with this because it was a really good sort of tripartite system that brought, there was some trade union involvement as well. It was quite effective. We thought it should have continued. This government has decided not to, which I think is unfortunate. It remains to be seen what kind of employer involvement with Skills England there will be. The trouble with these sort of macro things that sort of sit in Whitehall is they can be a bit isolated from what's really going on and tend to be dominated by big businesses which have their own particular skills need. I mean, this was the problem with the apprenticeship levy. I mean, I think with the apprenticeship levy, the idea was you'd put firms in the driving seat because they'd be paying, they'd be coughing up for it rather than the government dictating everything. But it became dominated by large firms because SMEs just don't really have the bandwidth to think about skills very much. They know they need to be thinking about skills, but they're too busy sort of, you know, making a success of their business. So business engagement is really, really difficult, and I think this is something we need to work on. I think other countries like Germany, you want to, for an example, the German Chambers of Commerce system, which is quite powerful and quite influential and has all firms in an industry. If you're in a particular industry, you have to join this Chamber of Commerce, otherwise you're excluded from lots of things like sort of joint training and R&D, so maybe something a bit more hands-on like that. And it's great that LinkedIn steps up to sort of perform this public good, but I guess you could argue that, not being rude, LinkedIn may have their own agenda. It may not always accord with the need of the wider sector, and it probably shouldn't be left up to LinkedIn. But I mean, hats off to LinkedIn for doing this stuff anyway and for sharing it with employers.
And a final point, if I may. I think making it as easy as possible for business to get involved is very key. And if I just look at, you know, LinkedIn's data, you know, there's various different actors or departments within the government that are looking at data in a different light. So you'd DWP who'd be looking at inactivity data. You'd have DENSI that you mentioned earlier on that might be looking at a particular angle. And I think hopefully with Skills England as an umbrella organisation, I think anything that makes it as easy as possible to get data, not just from LinkedIn, from any business organisations, that's probably one takeaway that I would have just as a final thought on that question.
Maybe just a lot of the discussion that we've had was around sort of greening skills and upskilling within existing jobs. But there are also going to be some dislocations in the labor market. And perhaps the largest one in advanced European economies or advanced economies is probably going to be around mobility and transport, where a whole economic ecosystem of particularly maintenance and repair organization, the garages, will undergo massive changes because electric vehicles don't need to change oil. They have little to no maintenance. We touched on that this morning. On the other hand, and so that's something that is well understood, and we've got reasonable estimates as how the stock of internal combustion engines will go down and the stock of electric vehicles will go up. So we know that is going to happen, some shape or form, and there's going to be a lot of people with jobs today who are going to have to move. We also know that there are some areas where we need a lot more skills and a lot more qualified workers to deliver the changes that are needed. Heat pumps, residential heat pumps are an obvious example, EV charging stations, etc. So how should one think about, how should the UK and how is the UK maybe thinking about those kinds of shifts? And they're obviously connected because the types of skills that you have as a car repair man or woman, obviously not the same that you need for heat pumps installation, but it's a similar type of job. It attracts similar types of people. So there could be an obvious sort of retraining program. Is that, so question to both of you is this the right way to think about this as a question? So that's something that a government should tackle with industry head on, and how does one do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you point out many of these skills are quite adjacent. You know, okay, so you maintain petrol cars, and your ultimate destination might be fitting heat pumps. I mean, I've done neither job, so maybe I'm talking out of my hat here, but you're an engineer, you know, you understand engineering, you understand fixing things and making things and making them work. So the skills actually are relatively adjacent. It might take a bit of a mental leap, but you can certainly retrain given the opportunity. One issue, I think the big issue with here is the sort of regulatory hold-up problem. Obviously, everything's specific skills are sort of quite heavily regulated. So you may be accredited to be sort of engine technician, but there might be a problem getting accreditation to be a heat pump engineer. You might have to go through an expensive and unnecessary training course. So I think the role for government here is making sure there are no unnecessary hurdles to doing that. If there are very new and important skills to be learned, there needs to be some kind of support for people while they're doing this. And you need to make sure there is no regulatory hold-up. And where the skills are very adjacent, I think, so we've been looking at the issue of northeast Scotland, where the oil and gas industry is very much on the decline, driven by policy. A lot of concern over what these people will do. Highly skilled, well-paid jobs that people obviously don't want to lose. So the obvious thing is to transition to get these people to building and installing wind farms, because that will be the new energy industry of northeast Scotland. Again, the skills are relatively adjacent, but you need to make sure there's a good transition for that. So one of the ideas being floated are skills passports. So you have a list of the skills you have an idea of the destination, and the government or the regulator or the local skills improvement plan can plot a transition for you. So skills passports, I think, will really help people reassure them that, that they can go and do something new and greener.
I think also from an employer point of view, you'll have to make space for folks to retrain and upskill. And I think you have to be very deliberate in that strategy. And I think regardless of the sector you're in, you'll have to create the space for that and create time for workers to dedicate to reskilling and upskilling where needed. I suppose that's what would be kind of top of mind for us as LinkedIn, you know, that we would observe. I mean, it's interesting going back to the construction sector that you were mentioning earlier on, that was featured in the conversations this morning, you know. While we haven't seen, we have construction members on our platform. Sometimes LinkedIn is thought of as a white-collar platform. It's actually not. It's broader than that. But it was interesting on the back of the conversation we had over lunch. I went to see, you know, how the construction sector has featured in our report launch today. And while our members have not increased massively, it's interesting that in the construction sector, we've had a 26% increase in terms of green skills that construction workers on our platform have added to their profiles on LinkedIn. So I think even in sectors where there may be challenges in terms of the green transition, I think what you will see is there are employers and there are sectoral initiatives to bring their workforces along. And it's happening already at the moment. I'm not saying for 1 minute it's sorted, but certainly I think there's work that's definitely happening beneath the hub of the car at the moment.
We have time for one more question from the audience. You were first.
Hello, Katie Neck, founder of Sustain Futures. We're committed to closing the green skills gap inclusively. We've built a green skills evaluation tool to help corporates get the data that they need to fill the gaps. One of the challenges that we're having in selling this is the stakeholders internally. So we're looking at sustainability teams, L&D teams, and other business leaders to sign off budget. They're not seeing it as something urgent. We're giving them data around their own business. We're giving them data around the Gen Z and the people entering their workforce. But I wondered if you could help me with the business case of making this a bit more urgent on their agenda.
Well, yeah, I suppose extinction for lack of the right skills is possibly quite a good thing to put on your PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, I mean, it depends. That's a bit over dramatic, and it depends on the industry. But I mean, you know, the green transition is happening, and Labour, the new government, are really, really keen on this. Ed Miliband, the energy minister, is the most prepared of all the Labour ministers. You might not get this impression from reading the Daily Telegraph, but he's been thinking about this for years. There's a lot coming in the green agenda. So yes, if companies don't get on board, then they risk being left behind.
I completely agree with that. I mean, two-thirds of the job titles that we have on LinkedIn today are for jobs that did not exist 20 years ago. So I think anything I can do to help, and if data points help you in terms of advancing your case, I'm very happy to do that, because we do believe that, you know, this is a big thing, and this is not necessarily LinkedIn specific, but certainly there's a lot of hunger out there to basically talk about the green agenda, to understand it, so that then you can have conversations around what initiatives, if any, you want to start engaging on to kind of move to the green economy.
Fascinating conversation, and I think like this morning, actually very upbeat. This is happening, the green skills are recognized, the market is already moving. There clearly is a huge demand, and you haven't raised any fundamental obstacles, any fundamental barriers to this moving forward. Yes, it could probably move faster like everything. But I wanted to just give you a chance to, maybe as a last reflection, reflect on that, whether this is the right state of mind to think about green skills, and is there one thing that we just mustn't forget to prioritize? What's the one thing that might slip off people's to-do list or list of top 3, top 5 priorities?
Yes, so when I was writing this report, writing my little speech, I sort of had a look back on it, and I thought, hang on, it's all about skills. There's not very much green in there, so I stuck a bit of green stuff, as you may have noticed. It's still mostly about skills. But you know, the green skills issue and the skills issue are basically the same. And there is a lot of thought going into tackling them. So we just need to make sure it's done in a very green direction. And I think Labour do realise there's a problem with labour market exclusion, skills issues, and the green transition is on top of that. So it's almost identical to the skills system problem that we have to solve and are trying to solve. And the second part of your question was?
One thing that we shouldn't forget.
Don't forget that you've got to bring people with you. Don't make it, don't make the green transition something that's done to you, done to other people. Bring them along with you. And that's particularly true for skills, because, we all think we're skilled at stuff. We quite like our jobs. We don't necessarily want to be told we've got to do something completely different that we might not feel qualified to do. So bring people with you, otherwise you'll have a problem.
I would say anybody looking for a job or looking for job security, green is it. The jobs are on the rise. There's a massive gap between supply and demand. And certainly with regards to Gen Zers who are coming out, who are going to make up a third of the workforce by 2030, only 1 in 10 of those have one green skill at the moment, based on our data and our analysis. So job security, anybody who's looking for job security, green is going to be it for a long time to come. Plus digital, of course. So that's probably one takeaway I'd leave the audience with. And then in terms of, sorry, what was the second part of the question again? Apologies.
What's the one thing we shouldn't forget about?
I'd build on what Steve was saying there, in the sense that green is just another facet of skills and skills generally. And, people's jobs are changing the whole time. My job is changing the whole time. I'm learning the whole time. And I think if we take a skills-based approach and we understand that job families are, there are a series of tasks that can be done by a series of skills that you're not defined by your title. And if you basically take the approach that I am learning the whole time and recognize, and I think we are all doing our jobs in a more sustainable way than we have done in the past. We're not printing out as much, for example, as we used to do. And there are small incremental steps, but they are steps nonetheless. And I think if we are going to achieve our goals and not see this big, massive white elephant in a way that how can we ever achieve these particular goals, I think if we take incremental steps in terms of looking at job families, and in particular when it comes to green, as a series of skills to do a job, your current job or a future job in a more green way, I think that might help us all get more comfortable with the size of the challenge that has been presented to us.
Thank you very much, Steve, Kate, for this wonderful discussion.
Good job. Thank you.